Jesus had finished with the Lord's Supper and his high priestly prayer, one of the longest prayers in the New Testament, if not the longest, where he prayed for his disciples, including us. It was nighttime, and they left the upper room. On this episode of 10-Minute Bible Study, wherein we are studying the Gospel of John in 10-minute, easily digestible bites 5 times a week. John 18, verse 1. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Geological or geographical features that are still present today and known by those words give us a general idea where Jesus walked on that night. They went across the brook of Kidron, which was something of a wadi, which was down in the valley of Kidron, which you can see labeled top left of your map there on the screen. And you can see the little band there that is the Kidron Valley. And just above it, near the center of that map, you will also see the Mount of Olives. And just below that, on the side of it, on the lower slope of it, you'll find the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, John doesn't mention this garden by name. He simply calls it a garden. But the other gospel writers provide us with that information. So the path that Jesus and his disciples took would have taken them as they left the city through Solomon's portico, as you can see right next to the outer walls of the temple. Then they would cross probably over a bridge of the brook of Kidron. It was spring, so there was water running. This was very dry in the summer, so there was no water, but in the spring they would walk over a bridge. They'd walked this path before a lot. It's the way to Bethany, where they had Lazarus was and all that, and also to get to the Mount of Olives they would walk that. It is believed that when Jesus and his disciples came to Jerusalem to stay, they would often simply camp out in the Mount of Olives, and possibly also in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like the time the disciples were acting like tourists, you remember that, and they marveled at the giant stones of the temple, and then they sat on the Mount of Olives, and Jesus told them that there wasn't going to be one stone left on another as they were looking at the temple. You can kind of see that picture here. But this time, it was nighttime, and quite a bit more somber, because he had told them that he was going to be leaving them. They made their way to Gethsemane, which was a favorite gathering place for the band. Remember, these guys didn't have a normal home, and they would meet there in the heat of the day, perhaps, and also at night to cool off. It was a grove of olive trees. Gethsemane is a word that means olive press, so it could have been that there was a olive press right near there at that time, or it could be a historical name. It would make sense to have the olive trees and then the press in the same place. I'll show you a picture of what 4 different Christian denominations have decided is the real deal, and it has been historically thought that way. Now, I got to warn you, as it is usually with biblical sites, you've got an idea in your mind what it looked like, and then when you see what this looks like, you will be disappointed. You have a certain scene in your mind and it doesn't fit, but many years have passed and we don't know what it looked like. Consider how the way a farmyard can change in just 15 years once it's left. We have no idea how it looked back then, but we do know that it had olive trees. And what's with those gnarly trees in this picture anyway? Some guides used to actually tell the tourists that those trees were the same trees under which Jesus prayed. But recently, their age was carbon dated, and it was discovered that these trees were less than 1,000 years old, so that really didn't fit. But here's the interesting part, though. When they carbon dated it, they also did a DNA run on it, and they discovered that all of the trees that you see in this picture that are there came from the exact same tree. Now, this was a popular site, Gethsemane was. Even in early times, Christians would come to Jerusalem hoping to walk in the steps where Jesus walked. And so it is surmised that sometime in the later Middle Ages, those who took care of this grove noticed all the trees were dying, and here was their last tree, and they said, we got to do something. We got to keep this place of Gethsemane, which means olive press, and where the olive trees were, we have to keep this grove alive. And so they took cuttings from one single tree, and they replanted the whole place. So all of those trees very well could be clones of the original trees that Jesus prayed in the midst of. Now, when you take a cutting from a tree, it technically is the same tree when it grows. So it is like a clone. John 18, verses 2 to 4. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew this place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said, "Whom do you seek?" Such a nice, pleasant place to pray and to rest, now disturbed by the clanging tramp of soldiers' feet. Judas procured a band of soldiers. Now that's a Latin term in the Greek. It's a Greekanized Latin term, which means coil or spring, like a snake, a coil of men, a bunch of men ready to explode on you. It's a Roman military cohort. Now, a Roman cohort was the 10th part of an army, so that would mean it was 600 men. It would seem rather ridiculous to send 600 men into that little garden. I don't think they sent that many. The cohort was responsible and given the responsibility of arresting Jesus, and so they sent a detachment of soldiers, a portion of the cohort, to do the actual deed. But then again, when someone was as popular as Jesus was, there might have been Roman fears that there would be quite an uprising when they tried to arrest him, and that many would rush to his aid. And so maybe they did bring a big pile of men, make it all the more frightening, I guess you could say. And also, there were officers from the chief priests who were present. This was a representation of the temple guard, led there to oversee and to assist. Needless to say, these soldiers came prepared for a big fight. And Jesus surprises them. He stepped forward and said, "Whom do you seek?" They came for a fight, but here he gave himself up. And he did this, according to verse 4, knowing all that would happen to them. He came forward. He knew what was going to happen to him, all of it. And he presented himself. You should see their response next time.